I still remember the exact moment my daughter-in-law looked at my oil-stained work uniform and called me a low-class freeloader in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that the house we were standing in wasn't hers. It wasn't even my son's. And I had been keeping that secret for years. My name is Robert. I'm 58 years old. And until that night, I thought my family understood who I was. I spent most of my life working with my hands. I repaired industrial machines for a living. And yes, my clothes often smelled like oil. But every dollar I earned went toward taking care of my family. When my son, Ethan, got married to Jessica, I welcomed her like a daughter. I helped them move into a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. I paid for repairs when the roof leaked. I fixed the plumbing. I even helped with their mortgage payments during a difficult year. I never told them how much I had contributed because I didn't want them to feel like they owed me anything. For a while, everything was fine. Then Jessica started making comments about my clothes. She would say things like, "You should really dress better when you come over." I laughed it off. Then she started complaining that I was visiting too often. Eventually, she told Ethan that I was embarrassing the family. I tried to ignore it because I didn't want to create problems between my son and his wife. Then came the night of Ethan's birthday dinner. Everyone was there. Jessica's parents were there. Her friends were there. My son was sitting beside her. I arrived straight from work because I had been called to fix an emergency machine at the plant. I was wearing my old blue work uniform. I apologized for being late and sat down. Jessica looked at me from across the table. She stared at the oil stains on my shirt and smiled. Then she said loudly, "Honestly, Robert, couldn't you afford a clean shirt?" Everyone became quiet. I said, "I came straight from work." She laughed and said, "Of course you did. That's always your excuse." I looked at my son. He didn't say anything. Then Jessica continued, "You know what I think? You like pretending you're helping everyone, but you're actually just a low-class freeloader who doesn't know when he's no longer wanted." The room went silent. I could have defended myself. I could have told everyone exactly how much money I had spent helping them. But I didn't. I simply smiled. Jessica looked confused. She expected me to get angry. Instead, I picked up my jacket and said, "Enjoy the rest of the evening." I walked outside. My son followed me to the driveway. He said, "Dad, please don't make this bigger than it is." I looked at him and asked, "Do you believe what she said?" He didn't answer. That silence hurt more than her insult. I drove home that night and sat alone at my kitchen table. I kept thinking about one thing. Maybe I'd been helping them for too long. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to stop paying for everything. The mortgage help would stop. The repair bills would stop. The expensive gifts would stop. And most importantly, I was finally going to tell my son the truth about the house he thought belonged to him. Because there was something he had never known. Years earlier, before Ethan even met Jessica, I had purchased that house through a family trust. The deed was in my name. I had allowed my son and his wife to live there because I wanted them to have a safe place to build their life. I never used that information to control them. I never even mentioned it. But after being called a freeloader in a house I legally owned, I realized it was time for them to know the truth. The next morning, I called an attorney. And what he told me made me realize this wasn't just a family argument anymore. My attorney told me something I wasn't expecting. He said the house was completely protected under the trust. But there was another issue. Jessica had recently filed paperwork claiming that she had made substantial financial improvements to the property. If she ever tried to challenge ownership, those documents could become a problem. I asked him why she would do that. He said, "You should ask your son." I called Ethan. He came over that evening. He looked exhausted. I told him I wasn't angry. I just wanted the truth. He finally admitted that Jessica had been pushing him to put the house in their names. She had told him that I was getting older, and that eventually the property should become their inheritance. Ethan said he had refused because he didn't feel right taking something that wasn't his. That's when I realized something important. My son wasn't the person I needed to be angry with. He had been caught between us. I told him about the trust. He looked shocked. "Dad, you've owned this house the whole time?" I nodded. "Yes." He sat there in silence. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I said. "Because I wanted you to believe you built your life yourself." He started crying. For the first time in years, I saw the little boy who used to sit beside me while I fixed broken machines. But then his phone rang. It was Jessica. She demanded to know why he was at my house. Ethan didn't answer. She called again. Then again. Finally, he turned the phone off. We spent the next hour talking. I told him I wasn't going to throw him out. I wasn't going to punish him for marrying her. But I also wasn't going to allow anyone to disrespect me in my own property. Ethan agreed. The next day, I sent Jessica a formal letter explaining the ownership of the house. I expected anger. I expected threats. I didn't expect what happened next. She called me screaming. She said I had manipulated her entire marriage. She said I was trying to control their future. Then she said something that made me realize she still didn't understand what was happening. "You can't take our house away from us." I calmly replied, "It's not your house." She hung up. 2 hours later, I received another call. This time, it was from a number I didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as Jessica's attorney. He said she believed she had a legal claim to the property. I told him he was welcome to review the trust documents. He said he would. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, Jessica showed up at my house with 2 moving trucks. She started removing furniture. When I arrived, she looked at me and said, "We're taking our things." I told her she could take her personal belongings, but then she pointed toward the living room and said, "We're taking that too." I told her no. She laughed. "You can't stop me." Then she said the sentence that completely changed the situation. "Actually, Robert, I already spoke to someone at the bank. I know exactly how much money you have." I froze. I had never told Jessica about my finances. I looked at Ethan. He looked just as confused. Then Jessica smiled and said, "You really should have been more careful about who you trusted." And that's when I realized the house wasn't the real thing she wanted. She had been investigating my finances for months, and she wasn't trying to take the house anymore. She was trying to take something worth far more than the house. I asked Jessica exactly what she meant. She smiled and told me I would find out soon enough. After she left, I called my attorney immediately. He told me not to panic. We reviewed every financial document connected to the trust and discovered something disturbing. Someone had attempted to access confidential information about my accounts using Ethan's personal information. The attempt had failed, but the timing was too perfect to ignore. I asked Ethan if Jessica knew his social security information. He looked at me and said, "Yes." His face went pale. We contacted the bank and placed additional protections on the accounts. Then we contacted the authorities about the attempted access. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. Jessica stopped calling. She stopped visiting. She even stopped speaking to Ethan. I thought maybe the situation was finally over. Then one afternoon, Ethan received an envelope. Inside was a copy of a document claiming that I had promised Jessica and Ethan a portion of my estate. It was supposedly signed by me. But there was one problem. The signature was fake. My attorney immediately recognized it. We reported the document. An investigation began. And that's when the story took a turn I never expected. Investigators discovered that Jessica had been contacting multiple people, trying to gather information about my assets. She had also been telling people that I was mentally incapable of managing my finances. Her plan was to challenge the trust and gain control over the property and eventually access other assets. But she had made one huge mistake. She had sent some of those messages from an account connected directly to her. The evidence was undeniable. Ethan was devastated. He told me he couldn't believe the woman he married had gone this far. I told him something he didn't want to hear. You don't have to defend me. You just have to protect yourself. A few weeks later, Ethan filed for divorce. Jessica fought it. She claimed that I had turned him against her. But the evidence told a different story. The court ultimately rejected her claim to the property. She had no ownership rights to the house. She also had no legitimate claim to my assets. The house remained in the family trust. Ethan moved into a small apartment while the divorce was finalized. I never asked him to come live with me. I wanted him to learn how to stand on his own. Months later, he came to my house one evening. He sat beside me on the porch and apologized. He said, "Dad, I should have defended you that night." I told him, "You were scared. I understand." He started crying. Then he handed me something. It was a photograph from his childhood. The two of us standing beside an old truck, both covered in oil after I had taught him how to repair an engine. He said, "I used to think being successful meant having nice clothes and a big house. Now I know it's about knowing who actually loves you." I looked at the photograph and smiled. I never told Jessica how much money I had. I never told her what else I owned. And I certainly never told her that I had already changed my estate plan. Everything she thought she was going to inherit was now going to a foundation that helped families struggling with housing. When Ethan heard about it, he laughed for the first time in months. "Dad," he said, "she would lose her mind if she knew." I smiled and said, "That's exactly why she doesn't need to know." Looking back, being called a low-class freeloader was one of the most painful moments of my life. But it also revealed something I had refused to see. Some people don't respect what you do for them. They only respect what they think they can get from you. I spent years trying to prove my love through money, repairs, and sacrifices. But I finally learned that real family doesn't measure your worth by your clothes, your bank account, or the size of your house. And the woman who tried to humiliate me in front of everyone ended up discovering the one thing she never expected. The man she called a freeloader was the person who had been quietly paying for the life she thought she deserved. And this time, I didn't need to say a single word. The truth spoke for me.